Hello friends, it's Kristie Marcotte. I recently shared a video using Queen & Company's Mother's Day Shaped Shaker Kit. So now it's time to share my cards using their new Father's Day Shaped Shaker Kit. The kit includes a 3 by 4 inch stamp set, 4 steel dies, and enough foam and acetate pieces to make 12 shaker cards. Since the kit doesn't include a paper pad or shaker toppings, I will be using an assortment of Queen & Company collections for my cards. All products are linked in the description box if you are interested in purchasing any of the items. For my first card, I'm using the Magical Characters paper collection, and my plan is to make a shirt to go with this shaker die. So I have just some solid green cardstock that I'm creating the collar. And I don't have any measurements on how I created this. I just kind of eyed it and folded where I thought that the collar would kind of wrap around that tie. And then just adhered it with some ATG on the back. And then I went ahead and put that foam piece down. And before I get any further on the shaker element, I'm just going to adhere that card front onto a card base. And then I cut out the die cut with some of this fun striped paper that's in the collection. And I don't want the polka dot paper on the inside, so I did add that same stripe paper on the inside of the shaker. Now I'll go ahead and put an assortment of different toppings. So I have some diamonds along with some of the jewel toppings. And then I'll remove the backing and then adhere the acetate on top to seal all of those little shaker goodies in. And then I'll just use some liquid adhesive to attach that die cut on top. And I just want to make sure that it adheres in place, so I just put my acrylic block on there just to let the glue dry. So now I'll go ahead and stamp a sentiment on some white cardstock. And I love this sentiment, it's so perfect. Dad, you are terrific. So I'm going to cut some little fishtail banners on the ends of this little piece. And then I'm going to layer it with some of this blue cardstock. And this is just some blue cardstock from my stash. I love to add layers, so I always have plenty of cardstock on hand. And now to adhere the collar onto the tie, I'm just going to use some liquid adhesive and then again hold that in place with my acrylic block. And it did sit longer than that half a second you just saw. And now I'm going to attach that sentiment on the card and I'm going to put it right over the tie. But since I don't want the two ends to droop down, I'm using some of the leftover foam that's from the inside of some of Queen & Company's shakers. I always save that foam because it comes in handy at some point. And then just to decorate the inside of the card a little bit, I put just a strip of the pattern paper. And then just a few embellishments. I'm using some of the Brilliant Blue Pearls. I put 2 of them on the collar for the buttons and then just a few of them in that bottom right hand corner. And that is card number 1. Now moving on to card number 2. I used some of Queen & Company's foundation dies to cut out the large banner as well as that scallop circle. And then I'm just layering that banner with some of the blue cardstock. For most of my matted layers, I add 1/8 of an inch. So the background, that blue stripe paper is 4 by 5 1/4, and then that blue paper is 4 1/8 by 5 3/8. And then by adding it to an A2 size card, then I have that just 1/8 of an inch of the card base still showing. So now for my sentiment, I decided I'm going to add it right onto this orange plaid circle. So I'm just inking that up, and this is another fun sentiment. You are a classy kind of guy. I love that pink on the back. Paper collections always have such a nice variety of different colors and styles. So for this card, I'm going to use the mustache for the shaker. And I cut out the top part using some of their gray foam. So they have some glitter foam and then they also have a few neutral colors that don't have the glitter. So the one thing about using the foam on the inside of the shaker is it does add a lot more dimension than if you just had regular paper. So I couldn't add real thick toppings. But Queen & Company sells the rubble topping, which is pretty small. I am picking out some of the larger pieces because I do still want it to be able to shake. And then the nice thing about using the foam, it's self-adhesive, so all I have to do is remove the backing and adhere it right onto the shaker. And then for the star embellishments, these are from one of the foundation dies. I cut out the white with more of the fun foam, and I did cut the one upside down, so I had all the stitch detail on the backing instead of the front, so I had to recut that larger white star. So there it is, cut correctly now. And then I pulled out an assortment of Queen & Company bling. So I have 3 different colors of their stars. And these are fun because half of them are like a shiny and then the other half are frosted. So I'm putting a few of them in the center of the stars. And then I decided I wanted to use some more of the brilliant blue pearls again. So I do pull those back in and add just the small one inside that smaller white star. So there is card number 2. And I do apologize, my daughter shared her cold with me, so I'm a little stuffed up right now, but I figured I still have a voice, so I'm gonna get through this voiceover. So moving on to card number 3. I'm using the Magical Characters paper collection, and then I also use this fun stitched rays die from Reverse Confetti. It kind of gives it that superhero look. So to go along with that fun die, I'm going to use the Dad superhero die that's included in the kit, and I cut it out with some red polka dot paper. This is going to be a very primary colored card. So first I'm going to go ahead and pull out that insert, and I will definitely keep it because that is a big piece that can be used later. And then for the background of the shaker, I'm using some white pearlescent paper, and I just did a real quick tracing with pencil so I could figure out the size to put behind there, and I don't want any of that white sneaking out from behind the red. So adhere that onto the card, and then I'll attach the foam piece down, give it a good snug press. And then I'll pull out some of the shaker toppings. So I have some of the red diamonds, and then again some of the blue stars. These are the jewels. I love all the sparkle from these. And I figure it needs a little bit more because this is a larger shaker. So I want to make sure I have enough inside. Put some liquid adhesive on the back of that die cut. And all of the dies in the kit have a really nice faux stitching around them. It's hard to see in the video, but it goes all around the edge and then also through each of the letters. And then for embellishments, I'm using some more of the stars from one of the foundation sets. So I just cut a random amount of red and blue, and I used some pearlescent paper for those just to add a little bit of shine. It is still a masculine card, and I don't want to add a ton of glitter or anything on it. I figured the shaker toppings was probably enough sparkle on this card. So I'm just putting 2 of the stars in the upper left-hand corner and then 3 of them in the lower right-hand corner. But then I changed my mind on that 3rd red star. It just didn't seem balanced quite right. So I pulled out one of Queen & Company's Bullseye Yellow bling. And I think it just tied really nicely with the yellow background. And then just to add a little more embellishment, I have some of the red frosties, putting those in the center of the red stars and then just kind of sprinkling them some around the other stars. And I felt like it still needed just a little bit more, so I pulled the blue jewel toppings out again, and these are these teeny tiny little blue stars. Super cute. So I'm just going to add those just for that extra touch. And they do have one flat side, so I'm trying to make sure I get the flat side down so they'll adhere. And I'm just using some liquid adhesive to adhere those to the card. And since they're so small or hard to pick up, I'm using my jewel picker tool. It's very helpful when you got to pick up those tiny little pieces like sequins or these little tiny toppings. And there is my finished card. I really like how this one turned out. That die cut is so much fun. So now moving on to card number 4, and I am going to use a card sketch this time. This is one of my favorites, MFT number 416. I'm still using the Magical Characters paper. Like I said, there's a nice variety of different colors included all in the one paper pad. So I am going off of the sketch just a little bit. I'm changing some of the dimensions. And instead of that sentiment bar on the bottom, I'm going to be using a banner instead, but I wanted to put a little bit of twine behind just to kind of anchor the sentiment down. So I just wrapped some of the blue and white Queen & Company twine, 2 rows of it on the bottom, and adhered it with some ATG and some score tape. I'll go ahead and adhere my card front onto a card base. And for this card, I'm going to use the final die that's included in the kit. It's a super cute bow tie. And then I cut it out using some of that blue striped paper. I think it had enough contrast that it'll really stand out against the pattern paper. I'm adhering the cutout pieces from the die on the inside of the shaker, but then I could see the little gap still showing through with that pattern paper behind, and I didn't really like the look of that, so I'm going to go ahead and just pull up that foam, and then I'm just going to adhere it onto the same pattern paper. And then just using some scissors, I'm going to cut really close along the edge. That way when the shaker's on there, you won't see those just little gaps that are showing. Another option is to use the same pattern paper and then just cut out that die cut twice. And then you could just adhere one of them down, and then you could add the foam on top of the other one. I selected 2 different toppings for the shaker. I'm using some of the black sprinkles along with the silver rubble. I thought it had a nice look with that dark blue paper. So to seal all of that in place by putting the acetate on top, and then I'll put my liquid adhesive on the back of the die cut. Hold that in place with one of my acrylic blocks, and while the glue dries, I'll work on the sentiment. And I used one of the foundation die sets to cut out that fun little stitched banner. I love the stitched banners. There's, I think, 3 of them in the set. So there's a nice variety for whichever size sentiment you have. And I just used some blue ink and stamped the Happy Father's Day. And then I'm just going to layer that with some of the same blue cardstock, cutting out the little banners on the side. And then I do want to pop that up because it's going to be going over the twine. So I'm just using 2 real thin pieces of foam dimensional tape, and I'll just kind of sandwich it around that twine. I wiped away just a little bit of glue that was coming out on the top of the bow. And then time for embellishments, I pulled out a nice selection, and then I ended up only using the blue pearls. I'm never really sure which bling I want to use until I actually start adhering it onto the card. And even when I'm doing that, I keep changing my mind. And then just one final thing, I'm just putting that thin piece of pattern paper on the inside of the card. And that is card number 4. Now moving on to card number 5. I'm using Operation Right Home sketch number 187. The paper collection is Queen & Company's Happy Harvest, and even though this is more of a fall collection, there's only a couple of sheets in the entire paper pad that are very specific to fall. The rest of them can be used year-round, and I love that a lot of the colors in here work nicely for masculine cards. For my next 4 cards, I'm going to use the dies without the shaker element, since the dies always work just beautifully with or without the shaker toppings. So I'm just going to go ahead and mat all of this on some brown cardstock. And I do get asked about what brand cardstock I use, and I have so much cardstock in my craft room. Some of it's been around for a long time. Specifically this paper, because it has purple on the back, and I don't even recall where I would have bought cardstock with brown on one side and purple on the other. So I don't have any specific brand that I use. I just try to find the closest colors that coordinate with the paper that I'm using. So for the mustache, I just use some of the polka dot pattern paper that's in this collection. And like I said, I'm not doing a shaker this time, so I just adhered the outer little outside piece and the inside piece together with some liquid adhesive. And then I'm just going to use some of the faux stitched star dies that are included in the foundation set. I love the 3 different sizes that are included. There's also flowers, so for the more feminine cards you can have flowers, and then you can have the stars for either feminine or masculine. I'm just using some different bling that coordinates with the paper. So I have another one of the yellow bullseye and then some of these brown bubbles. And I'm using some of the orange iridescent bubbles as well. So overall, a fairly simple card, and I did follow this sketch pretty closely. So that is card number 5. And now moving on to card number 6. Again, I'm not going to use a card sketch, but I am using several of the foundation dies. I seriously love the foundation die sets. There are 2 of them, and I use both of them all the time. So I just use some of the plaid paper for the background, and then I cut the diagonal strip using some of the striped pattern paper. And then I'm just going to adhere that on to some brown cardstock for the layering. And I decided not to have any of the white card base showing this time. So that green paper is 5 3/8 by 4 1/8, and then the brown cardstock is A2 size, so 5 1/2 by 4 1/4. I'm using the bow tie die, and my original thought was I was going to layer 2 of them together just to add a little bit of dimension, but I didn't want to pop it up too much. So I'm just holding those in place with a little bit of score tape, and then I'll adhere the second bow on top of that bottom one. And then I end up changing my mind anyway, and now I'm going to put some dimensional tape on the background. See, I change my mind all the time while I just start making my cards. So I want to make sure to get a good coverage on the back so none of the sides will sag at all. So I'll put that first bow on the card first, and then I'll just use some liquid adhesive to put the second layer on top. And I probably could have just skipped this layer, but I already had it cut, so I just decided to add it on top anyway. That second layer also gave it a little more stability since this brown cardstock is a little bit on the thinner side. So next I'm going to add a sentiment, and I cut out this little tag using one of the foundation dies, and I'm using the Wishing You a Dapper Day. I'm going to add that on some brown cardstock, and even though it has those little notches on the sides, I'm actually going to just leave the layered piece solid. And then I cut this really thin piece of cardstock to just kind of anchor that sentiment, and I cut it just a little bit too short, so I just snipped it in half and then just adhered one piece on each side, and then I'll just be covering up that little gap in the center. And now nobody will know that piece was just a little too short. And to add a little embellishment, I'm using some of the banner dies that are in the foundation set, and I just cut 2 of them, one using this pattern paper, this really light kind of a beige color, and then just some of the brown cardstock. Cut one of the banners a little bit shorter and then just layered them. And then I'm trying to make this look sort of like a shirt, so I thought I'd put a couple of buttons. So these are just some of the brown bubbles, and I just put them underneath the bow tie, and then just a few of them around the sentiment and one on the banner. And there is my finished card, card number 6. And now moving on to card number 7. So I'm going to use the all bundled up paper collection this time. Even though this is a winter paper collection, once again, most of the papers will work for year round. And I just love the colors in this paper collection. It's one of my favorites by Queen & Company. So for the background, I'm using some of the solid gray fun foam, and I decided to dry emboss it with a star embossing folder. And I did have it cut to 4 by 5 1/4, but of course when you emboss, it kind of flattens it, so it stretched it out just a little bit. And that's not really a problem, except that I already had those other pieces cut to 4 inches wide, so now they wouldn't work. So I did have to go ahead and recut that stripe paper along with this glitter paper so that it was 4 1/8 instead. And just to make sure it adheres to the foam, I put some score tape in the center and then also just some liquid adhesive. And so for this card, I'm going to be using the Dad die cut again. And this will not be a shaker, because this will be my 4th card showing how to use all of the dies without using the shaker. So I'm going to do some inlaid die technique here. I'm using some of the white pearlescent paper, and then I'm just flipping over that Dad superhero die cut, adding some score tape to the back side, Trying to make sure I get really good coverage so I don't want any little gaps anywhere. Then I'll just flip that over and then put all of the white pieces inside, just like a jigsaw puzzle. That way it's nice and flat, and the pieces just will stick beautifully because score tape is super sticky. So once I have that all in place, I can go ahead and put it on my card. And since there are quite a few layers with the stripe paper and that glitter paper, I don't want the top part of this dad die cut sagging down. So I am adding some foam dimension tape just on the top. And this is the regular Scotch brand, which is a little on the thicker side. And then just on the bottom corner, I'm using some thinner foam squares. And now it has a nice even feel on the card. And the foam tape usually sticks really nicely, so I don't have to worry about it falling off the card at all. So now for the sentiment, I cut out another one of the little stitch banners. And I'm using the "You Are Our Hero" sentiment. So it kind of goes perfect with a dad card. I'm going to layer that on some more of this blue cardstock. And I do have my paper trimmer just off to the right, so when you see me disappear over there, I'm just doing a quick snip on the paper. So I'm just going to use some more of the thin foam squares to pop up that sentiment. And then just to add a little bit of embellishment, I cut one of the banners from the foundation dies. It's actually a really long banner, but I just cut the very end of it. And then I also cut one of the medium size stars using some more of the glitter paper. And then just a few little embellishments. I'm using some more of these blue pearls. And then also some of the white stars. And since I want to make sure that those stars adhere to the glitter paper, I do use a little bit of liquid adhesive. All of the bling does have adhesive already on it, but I'm always a little unsure whenever I adhere it to the glitter cardstock. So that is card number 7. I really like how this one turned out, and now I know you can dry emboss with the fun foam. And now moving on to card number 8. I'm going to use another card sketch. I know it throws people off when I don't use card sketches. This is another favorite lately. This is Freshly Made Sketches number 373. And I've gone back to the Happy Harvest paper collection. Just using a nice tone-on-tone paper for the background, and then used a variety of different pattern papers for those half-inch strips. And I just layered them all together with some of the brown cardstock. And then before I get going too far, I'm going to add my sentiment onto the card. And I do get nervous sometimes just stamping it after I've already started the card. I probably should have pulled out my mini Misty, but most of the time it stamps just fine. Queen & Company has very good quality stamps. So let's go ahead and put my card front onto a card base. And I've gone ahead and cut out the tie using some of this orange striped paper. And I'm just going to adhere it all together, basically doing the inlaid technique again, even though it's only the 3 pieces. So once again, I'm just using some score tape on the back side, and then I will be using some foam dimensional tape just to pop up that tie a little bit. So I'm going to remove the backing because otherwise that foam tape will not stick to the back side of the score tape. So I'll make sure to get really good coverage. I don't want any of the sides sagging down at all. Then I'll remove all of the backing, and then I'll just adhere that onto the rectangle panel. I'm just going to put that pattern paper strip on the inside of the card, and then add just a tiny little banner in that upper right hand corner. And this is again just using one of the foundation dies that I just snipped off the very end of it. I'm just going to add a little bit of bling. I have another assortment again. I have some iridescent bubbles, some of the jelly gems, and then just some of the regular bubbles. So overall, this card is fairly simple. I love this sketch just because you can add several different pattern papers all on one card. This is also a great sketch if you just have some narrow strips of pattern paper left. So there is the finished card, and that is card number 8. With card number 9, I'm moving back to the Magical Characters paper collection, and I use 3 different pattern papers and cut out all of the ties. So I have a stitched rectangle background just using some pearlescent paper, and I'm just going to mat all of that on some black cardstock. And then I'm just going to lay out the 3 ties, trying to look for placement before I start adhering them down. And only one of the ties is going to be a shaker on this card. The kit does include enough to have 3 shakers for each, and Queen & Company does sell the refills as well, so if you just love making shaker cards, definitely pick up some of their refill packs. But sometimes it's fun to combine a shaker with some of the non-shaker elements as well. So I'll get the red and the yellow ties glued in place, and I'm just using some liquid adhesive for that. And then I love the idea of having the little Mickey Mouse head for the tie. And since I don't want any of that white pearlescent paper to kind of peek through the edges of the background, I just cut some black cardstock to go behind this shaker piece. So I noticed I have a little tiny bit still peeking around, so I just trimmed that part off, and then I'll add some adhesive to the back, adhere that onto the card. And I noticed this had a few stray strands of the ATG tape, so I just tucked that behind. And I'll just use some liquid adhesive for the inside part of the shaker, since I still want the little Mickey head paper for the inside as well as that outside die cut. And now I'll pull out some of the different toppings. So I just have some diamonds this time. I have the red, white, and then the yellow, just to kind of go with the rest of the colors on the card. And I'll seal that all down with the acetate. Use some liquid adhesive to adhere that tie die cut in place. Hold it down with my little acrylic block. And then for the sentiment, I'm using one of the little banners again. And I'm just doing a Happy Father's Day, keeping it pretty simple, just using some black ink. I love the fonts on all of these stamps. And I do want to layer that just so it has a little more contrast against the rest of the card. So I'm just using some more black cardstock, cutting the little fishtails. And then since I don't want the 2 ends sagging down again, I just have that extra piece of foam from a former inside of one of the shakers. I think it was the Love Jar kit is the piece that I'm using here. Just putting it on the ends and then a little adhesive on the inside. Now it's nice and even on the card. And now time to add a little bit of bling. And I totally forgot when I was filling the tie with all the shaker toppings that I had one of the little magic topping sets that has these cute little mouse heads. So that would have been really sweet to put inside the tie, but it's already sealed in place. So I'm trying to decide where I want to place these on the card, and nothing looks quite right. I'm just determined to get one of these little mouse heads on my card. But I end up changing my mind, and then I remove all of those. And I actually changed my mind quite a bit on the bling on this card. So instead I pulled out some of the black and white lollies. And I'm still just going back and forth. I'm determined to get the little Mickey heads on my card. I have some bubbles on there. See, I keep fussing with it. I finally do give up and I don't use any of those, and instead I have some of the black jelly gems. And then even on that left hand side, I didn't like the look of all of that bling. So I do end up pulling a few of them off. And when you do pull them off, you kind of lose the little glue dot that's adhered on there. You could still use the bling later and just use some liquid adhesive. So now I decide I'm going to use one of the little red Mickey heads and just put it right between the Father's and the Day word. So I still got my little Mickey head on my card. So you'll see in this finished picture, I did remove some more of the bling off of that left-hand side. So now moving on to my final card, number 10. Again, I'm using the Magical Characters paper collection. And I went and cut 2 of the large banners using the foundation die and just some of the pattern paper. And I decided not to layer them in black this time. I think they had enough contrast against that chevron background. But I am going to layer the whole thing on some black cardstock, and then I'll adhere that onto my card base. Then I use some more of the gray fun foam and cut out this scallop circle, and then I'm going to use the red and white polka dot paper to add this bow tie shaker on the card. I'm just going to adhere that bow tie foam onto some red cardstock, and then I'll just cut really close to the edge. That way my background will be nice and solid and I won't have any of the gray foam peeking through. So again, you could also do this just by cutting out that bow tie twice and adhering one layer down and then building up your shaker. So since that foam is self-adhesive, I just pulled the backer off and adhered it to my card, and then I'm just using some liquid adhesive to put my bow tie shaker on the card. And then I'll hold that all in place for a little while with my acrylic block. And then once that is dry, I can start assembling my shaker. And I am going to put the inside of the shaker with that polka dot paper again. I like having the pattern paper inside. Adds just a little extra detail. And so this time I remembered to use those little magic toppings. So I have some of the little red Mickey heads and then also some of these little tiny bows. And then I just decided I'll have a little extra sparkle, so I use some of the red diamonds as well. Just put my acetate piece down to seal all of that in place, and then I'll adhere the bow die cut on top, hold that again in place with my acrylic block. And now I'm going to go ahead and add a sentiment, and I'm just stamping it on a little piece of white cardstock using the Happy Birthday Handsome. I think this would be a great card for a teenage boy. My son went through a phase where he loved wearing bow ties, so we had to buy, I don't know, he had maybe 10 different colors of bow ties. But I guess he's outgrown that phase and no more bow ties. So I'm just going to cut some little fishtail ends on that sentiment and then add it to some black cardstock so it has some contrast and really pops out on the card. It's always nice to have the little banner dies, but sometimes if you just need to cut your own, it's really simple to do. So now I'll just go ahead and put some liquid adhesive on the back so that it adheres nicely onto that foam. And now time to pull out some bling. So I have a little variety. Again, I used the last of my black lollies, and then I have some of the red frosties and then some of the yellow stars. So I love how this one turned out. The colors are just so bright and cheerful. So that is my final card, number 10. So here's just a quick recap of the 10 cards I made using Queen & Company's Father's Day Shaped Shaker Kit. This kit is available on Queen & Company's website. I have links in the description box if you are interested in purchasing one. Please let me know which card was your favorite. If you enjoyed this video, please subscribe and don't forget to give it a thumbs up. I always appreciate your support. Thank you so much for watching, and I hope you have a wonderful day.